force would not be used to disperse the crowds. The crowds seemingly want to stay put because they feel they've made substantial gains. The government is now making some concessions, and we just mentioned a couple of them. One of the major ones to come out in just the last hour was what state television announced, which is the resignation of Gamal Mubarak as Secretary General of the ruling NDP.
Well, certainly, I mean, I think at the moment the people here are trying to read the messages. And they're trying to see what is happening, this visit of this senior commander of the army. And then shortly after, really, the news that you just told us, I mean, the fact that Gamal Mubarak has no more any role in the National Democratic Party, and that Safwat al-Sharif also has been asked to go, is something that made people very happy. There was a lot of cheers, people jumping in the air and clapping their heads. Also because apart from Gamal Mubarak, Safwat al-Sharif was a man who was seen as like one of the staunchest henchmen of President Mubarak, one of the men who made sure that the system was together. He was an information minister for many, many years, and he kept really tight control on all kind of information that was given to the Egyptian people. So certainly his departure, a good move, but from what I hear and from what I understand of what's going on among the pro-democracy supporters, it will not be enough yet, even though there is a realization, and that was the mood this morning, and then this afternoon it's changed with all these new developments. But there is an understanding among the pro-democracy protesters that somehow the situation has reached a deadlock, and somehow it needs to move forward rather. And they also realize that they need to get organized now. They need to find a group of people, because they don't want one person, but they want a group of people to go out there and to be the representatives of this youth movement, as it's called here. And they are the ones to start dealing with a transitional government, with a way of getting really rid of what they call the Mubarak system, and start preparing for the next phase in the country. So there is an understanding that things now have to move. All eyes
is there
are
any
on the
indication?
army.
Is there any indication, though, that things will move as far as the opposition is concerned? Any indication that they will get organized and unified around one figure? Because there have been meetings that have gone on today with the vice president, with some members of the opposition. But as more time goes on, is it also more time for the government to exploit those weaknesses and that lack of unity and organization within the ranks of the protesters?
Well, I think there is a realization that time is running out, and they really need to take it to the second stage now. Many people will tell you they don't want one person to represent them. They want a group of people that will represent the entire opposition, whether it's the youth that started this whole wave of protest or the other opposition groups, and all together they would start dealing with the government. They do not want to risk even finding themselves in a situation where there's again one very strong man who can take all the power for himself. But at the moment, that group hasn't emerged yet. You have the Baradei group on one side, who is having, by the looks of it, contacts with Vice President Omar Suleiman, and then you have another group, which is called the Group of the Wise Men, which also includes, for example, another Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Zuwail. It includes Amr Moussa, Secretary General of the Arab League, several former very senior ambassadors, but also they're also trying to find a way through. But at the moment, no one has the upper hand. And I think people here are realizing it has to go to the next step, because the next step is actually the most difficult one.
It is indeed. Let's thank you very much for now. Let's speak to another one of our correspondents in Cairo and just bring you up to date with reports we're getting that President Hosni Mubarak has now resigned as head of Egypt's ruling National Democratic Party. Another piecemeal concession, a concession nonetheless. Is it all cosmetic, or will it satisfy some of these protesters?
Well, that's going to be a very interesting question, because the way it is playing out right now, at least by many people's analysis, is this is a government very much in transition mode. Perhaps, the declaration that President Hosni Mubarak would come out and essentially in front of the entire nation, perhaps in front of the entire world, announce that he is stepping down from the presidency, or perhaps even leaving, as we saw in a similar situation in Tunisia. That may not be what the protesters will get, but what they are getting is a slow transition of the Egyptian government. We're seeing more and more powers being delegated to the vice president, even though it hasn't been officially announced. We're seeing the profile of the prime minister increase substantially. We're seeing the military play more of a visible role on the streets. And now with this announcement that indeed the political leadership of the ruling National Democratic Party has resigned, including the most senior figure, that of the president, it would be a very, very symbolic transition within the government. Whether or not that actually appeases the protesters, it's still a little bit too early. It is not what they are calling for. They don't want to see this gradual handing over of power, but more of a clean departure from the past. But undoubtedly, these developments in the terms of resignation of the president and perhaps the others from the ruling party will be seen as another attempt by the government to appease the protesters and to show them that they are indeed responding to their demands.
It does appear like a steady erosion of power as far as the government is concerned, particularly the person of the president himself. The vice president appears to be very much in control at this point. An interesting comment made by the prime minister in an interview he gave just in the last 24 hours suggested that the president, in effect, had already given over his powers to the vice president. The fact that President Mubarak has now resigned from the NDP, is this a signal that more concessions could come, or does it stop here as far as he's concerned? What might be the next step for him?
Well, every time we feel that we have hit a dead end, if you will, of concessions that can be made, it seems that yet another concession is offered to the protesters. When we first started a week ago, the perspective that many here thought that appointing Omar Suleiman as the vice president was seen as perhaps the most significant concession. But I can tell you from speaking to many protesters over the past several days, there are still a lot more measures that could bring people a lot more comfort. When you speak to the people on the street and the protesters and you ask them, well, these concessions have been made. What is it that continues to bother you? The president is leaving. You're giving him the rest of the time in office to leave. They don't really trust that the mechanisms of the government are safe enough to ensure that civilian rule will prevail. And that is the concern that many people have. One of the things that many are worried about is the constitution in Egypt right now favors the ruling National Democratic Party. In essence, there is a blurring line between the ruling National Democratic Party and the state. In essence, to become a president of this country, you must be nominated by the parliament, and the only party that can do that right now is the ruling National Democratic Parliament. So one of the demands of the protesters has been that the parliament be absolved so that you can have a truly representative parliament that is not rigged, that is not stacked by the NDP, and therefore can allow for a truly free and fair election in the future. Some are saying that will happen in due course, but others are saying, well, you know what, if the president is serious about transitioning this to a completely free and fair democratic system of governance, then these are the steps he must take immediately to show the people that he is committed to leaving office within 6 months under these conditions. He must absolve the parliament. He also must begin immediately to hand powers over to the vice president in an official manner, according with the Constitution, Article 139 of the Constitution. These are the demands of the protesters. What we are seeing are piecemeal drops of appeasement to the protesters, nothing yet officially announced by the president. And I think that is why there is such reluctance by the protesters to trust this president and to trust this government.
Thank you very much for the moment. We can now speak to one of those protesters just outside Tahrir Square, Ali Abdul Wahab. Ali Abdul Wahab, let me ask you about what we've just heard. Reports that President Mubarak is resigning as head of Egypt's ruling NDP party. Is that a clear sign now that he is committed to leaving sooner rather than later, or is it still not enough for you and most of the protesters out there?
I didn't hear all of that, but I can tell you the degree of trust in the protesters from all different political views is zero.
What do you make of President Mubarak's decision? According to reports from television reports that we're getting, his decision to now resign as head of the NDP.
Well, it's all like the rest of the decisions. They're all rather too little, rather too late. And I think these are just more sort of attempts at panaceas. Nothing more.
At this stage, do you not see it as